Talent is everywhere, but at many of America's top institutions, black leaders are still few and far between. That's the conclusion of CBS News political contributor Jamal Simmons, who reviewed publicly available data on diversity at several U.S. companies and universities. Simmons found the percentage of black people in leadership jobs is often stuck around 4%. That's even though 13% of Americans are black. Apple, Amazon, Google, and Facebook report their diversity numbers publicly every year. And so we can see what Simmons is talking about. In 2020, only 4% of Apple's leaders were black. Amazon, Facebook, and Google were all hovering around 3%. The 4% phenomena, as Simmons calls it, is a pattern he also found among tenured faculty at some of the most elite schools in America. That includes Harvard, Yale, Duke, MIT, and the University of California at Berkeley. And as Jamal puts it, quote, it's as if someone has put sticky tar paper on the road to African-American inclusion. And we should also point out that these companies and universities have almost without variation made public and significant investments and commitments to narrowing the gap and promoting diversity and inclusion on a broad scale. So let's bring in Jamal Simmons now to talk about all this. Jamal, good morning to you. The article is in a new journal, or the new article is in a journal called Democracy. And you make the point in it that these goodwill efforts by companies, while sincere, have not so far been very effective. So what needs to be done?
Yeah, you know, Tony, 25 years ago, I was a graduate student at Harvard, and we had a racial incident on campus. And so we confronted the dean of the Kennedy School at the time about why there were no African-American tenured faculty at the Kennedy School. He said, for the most part, it's a pipeline problem. There aren't enough people coming through the pipeline. Well, that was 25 years ago. There were none. You know how many there are today? There are two. 2 out of 55. That's less than 4% of the faculty at that school. And that's true for Harvard-wide. It's true for Yale, as you went through. So I began to, you know, as George Floyd happened and Breonna Taylor and companies started making a lot of these statements about commitment to racial equality and dealing with systemic racism, I began to wonder, do the companies and organizations have the teams at their fingertips that can actually deal with this very significant problem? And the more research I did, the more I kept finding that those teams are coming up short. And here's the thing. It's not just about one particular company. That's what was so amazing. It's about a whole sector. It's all about a trend that runs across sectors. I'll give you one story and we can go to the next. Colin Powell was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff 25 years ago. We are all very honored by that. He was the first African-American chairman. Today, 25 years later, not another black chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. There are 41 of the most senior commanders in the military who could even be considered. Only 2 of them are African-American. It's about 4.9%. So if you think about this like a parking lot and you number the spaces 1 through 10, most of the cars would be clustered around space number 4. And so it's not a ceiling, it's just sort of a cluster around 4%. And why is it we can't really break through that?
Yeah, the 4% phenomena. One of the points you make in the article, which I thought was compelling, is that these companies and the military, all these institutions, they look left and they look right and they say, well, we're doing as well as the other guys, so I guess we're doing okay. But that's a false sense of comfort in terms of their progress. So how do they push beyond that? What needs to happen?
You know, Mellody Hobson's been here. As a matter of fact, she was talking to you guys back in February, and she talked about this when she became chair of the Starbucks board. We got to attack this problem from both ends of the pipeline. You got to deal with the people who are coming into the pipeline at the entry level and make sure we have recruitment criteria that allow more people to come in. And then we've got to deal with people at the top levels, in the leadership. And what I find is most leaders, many leaders, have come through black-led organizations. And so if we think about building formal partnerships, formal relationships through many of these organizations, whether they're historically black colleges or people like Mellody Hobson, right, who got hired out of Princeton by John Rogers. She worked at Ariel Investments for years. She grew there. She flowered there. She became her own person there. And then she moved into board leadership at other places, right? We see that happen over and over again. Darren Walker, who's at the Ford Foundation, who's the president, he was at the Abyssinian Development Corporation before he went into, you know, Rockefeller and then Ford. We see this trend line. I say let's formalize it. Let's build some of these relationships so we don't cripple those black-led organizations when we cherry pick their talent, and let's bring some folks into mainstream at the top. So the candidates coming up through the pipeline have role models and people who are building a culture that will enable their success.
So, Jamal, we all agree that 4% number ain't so good. What would progress look like to you? What is the number that you go, okay, now we're talking?
So Tony brought it up in the beginning. So 13% of the country is African American, 10% of college graduates are African American. It just seems, so now we're at 4% in terms of leadership. It just seems like we ought to be getting closer into the 8, 9, 10% range if we're going to have parity. And one of the things, as Tony just mentioned, that I found in the research, talking to a lot of people who do this work, is you've got to set clear goals about what you want, and then you've got to really lean on policing what it is that you want. Some great professors did this thing about women on boards. You'll appreciate this. They found that that for a long time having one woman on a board was considered to be appropriate. People didn't think so. So all the companies looked around, and now you see a greater likelihood that there are 2 women on a board. So they went from tokenism to toucanism, and they predict that at some point there'll be threecanism, right? Because people will decide 2's not enough. The same thing exists with racial diversity at the leadership level.
Jamal, we're running out of time. Talent is everywhere. Opportunity should be as well. Thank you very much. You're watching CBS This Morning. We'll be right back.